So this is the first time that you've had an exhibition of this scale in a public gallery like this. Yeah. How does it feel to see your work presented in this context?
Well, it's kind of, humbling for one, to see everything presented like this, in such a, incredible space, really. I could never have kind of foreseen it happening in, 7 years now behind the camera. So, yeah, I'm definitely humbled to be seeing it like this. There's a kind of overwhelming there's a fear, because my heart's on show with everything that I talk about and, some of the pieces of writing that let people in to, some pretty, open parts of my heart. So there's fear, there's excitement, of course, that, this could be a bit of a springboard for me in my career. I never know who's going to walk in through the door. Already made a sale today, so that's, incredible to see that it's been received by people in that way on the other end, because, as artists, we need financial support as much as anything. So, yeah, that's been, amazing to have had that kind of support as well.
Do you think that not knowing kind of the audience base, really, that are coming into this space is actually quite exciting, because obviously there are people who are coming in not with any expectation about what they're going to see, particularly because of where the venue is based in a very tourist-driven kind of area as well. Does that sort of interest you, that there's all walks of life really could be coming in to see the work?
Well, I think for myself, a lot of what I've been doing with, showcasing work, as many artists now, it's been a case of putting it online. And we actually never get to see and feel who the people are. This kind of connection that you have with different people around different parts of the building is very different to what you'd receive through social media. And social media has, is perhaps more disposable kind of audience in many ways as well, where, maybe then they're invested to some degree, but I think having this kind of interaction and this kind of audience just adds a whole new layer to my work and, to any artist's work. I think this is essential that people from the real world, let's say.
And also when you're seeing something on a screen, it's all becomes uniform, the same size, the same kind of, pixels and all the rest of it. Whereas here in an exhibition, the work's presented, it's all at different scales, it's got, different angles, different juxtaposition between different works.
Yeah.
And that allows for that kind of much more kind of physical kind of experience, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you really get to see people, interacting with it when we have this opening, and can't help but just be curious about, how are people receiving it. So to see, people kind of like different angles and looking up and looking down and really kind of investing themselves in the work, rather than looking at it on a two-dimensional screen where it's just, one thing they stop at is the scrolling past. It's very instant, it's a double tap and then it's gone. But you can kind of feel people reflecting in a space like this. So for me, it's been amazing to have, met people who are from a different world, a different kind of, maybe with a different viewpoint of art.
Yeah. So you've got, I think, 21 works on display, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting how you've got little clusters of different groups of work. They're obviously all interrelated and connected, but I'm quite interested to hear more about how you selected the work, particularly for this exhibition.
Yeah. Well, there were probably 8 or 9 pieces that were absolutely, without question, going to be featured. One of them being Limelight, that's shown here. Especially when I'd seen the space, I already knew that that was going to be here, hopefully drawing people up the staircase when they see this tree. There was also First Dance over in the corner there. That stood for itself. That's been quite a foundational piece of work in my portfolio, which I'm sure we'll get into later, talking about specific pieces and their whys. But yeah, like I said, there were 8 or 9 that were absolutely going to be a part of the exhibition. And then it was a case of kind of thinking about the themes and what I'm actually trying to say. Like overall, there's the themes of kind of stillness, of course, finding light. But then within each, like you say, corner, there's collections of photographs that I kind of looked at and just thought would work really well together, like the two over on above the radiator there, or just offset on the radiator there. They have this, like that is a collection of 5, but then I wanted to give that kind of space and minimalism a kind of place in my portfolio as well, because a lot of my work is about form and the physical, but those included elements of emptiness and maybe a bit more kind of meditative than others. So the collections kind of just evolved, and I knew I wanted a collection of probably 7 or 8 from that particular location. So all of those, there's 6 actually, I knew that location had to kind of stand for itself as a pretty critical area for my photography over the past 4 years. It's a place that really speaks for itself. So yeah, I knew that location had to have a place.
So are these works that you've selected from a particular time period? Are they, some works that are some quite older pieces as well that are instrumental in kind of how your practice has developed?
Yeah.
Like Limelight, for example, is that one of those that's perhaps pivotal in that?
Yeah, there's probably, let me just think now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's about 12 or 13 pieces from 2021.
Okay.
So old work in many ways, but that was really the year for me that, I'd started to find my place in photography, and I'd started to see, an evolution throughout that period of style and themes. So they like spoke for themselves, and that was a year for me where I'd evolved. I'd left my corporate job, and I decided to do photography full time. So
It was full immersion by that point then, in 2021. That you just went for the plunge.
Yeah, and then there's a few from 2022 over in the corner there, and 2023 above the radiator there. So, a lot of it's old.
But when you look back on those particular works from 2021, then, do you have a particular connection with them now that maybe was different than at the time you actually were involved in taking them? Do you reflect on that? Does it capture that moment of time and how you were in that particular time of life as well, and things were changing for you?
Yeah, I think especially with something like this has evolved in many ways. This has been shown in a few different, in some smaller shows, and it's had its own place in terms of connecting with people in different ways. I've sold a copy of this. I've sold a smaller copy to somebody from, I won't mention his name actually. I'll edit that bit out. YOLO bought this one. But yeah, like it's evolved because I've had connections with people through the piece of work now as well. So I kind of view this through different eyes. I suppose maybe more mature eyes compared to 4 years ago, when I hadn't had maybe any exposure to conversations around my work. My work was very much my own kind of thing. It was very, I was probably more inward back then. And now I've brought it, in different ways into the outer world, and it's probably caused me to have a little bit more of a standoffish view, if that makes sense, like an outward view of my work, rather than more objective than being so immersed in it and so protective over it. And that's actually something that I've been feeling today. Like a lot of this is older work. It's incredible to have this display, but it also comes with an element of objectivity to it now, with how I'm looking at it. Maybe like with a maturity of, I've detached from that immersive, what does this mean to me, meaning, to I kind of understand it all now as a product of what I've done that stands for something, for the world as well now, and not just so. I'm not so emotionally tied.
And when work is in a public space, and particularly like a public gallery space, that removal is more pronounced, isn't it? Because it's the gallery has taken that kind of, that from you in a sense, borrowed it for a time to present to an audience, to present to people and share. And
Yeah.
you've been involved in that kind of process of hanging it, but then you kind of step away from that as well, so it becomes something else, doesn't it? It lives on its own a bit more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, the theme of interconnectedness runs through my work, and that's how I've felt with this whole process, you know, communication with yourself through the process and having your kind of input and thoughts to help put this together. You know, watching John hang it yesterday, and, you know, interactions with Gwyn and even Jess and all of the team, you know, Mena through the process. There's many people that I've interacted with that I've realised that this isn't just a me thing now, it's actually a collective display.
Yes, that's it. And there's different questions and different needs arise, don't they, from that, working in that way. Like you say, it's not just about you and the moment in which you took that work, that experience you had through the process. It's much more, you know, shared with the world.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
It feels, you know, like a long time ago since I stood there and actually, you know, created this. The same as all of these. In many ways, I still remember the moment, but the distance has grown quite exponentially in that time.
But it's all part. It's that sort of evolution, isn't it? It's so important, and you know, it's kind of what you have. Where you've got to today wouldn't be the place you've got to today without pieces like that.
Exactly.
And like you said, the conversations that you've had subsequently as well. Yeah.
And that is, you know, the one of many themes, but one of the themes is about growth and evolution through the creative process.
Yeah.
And that is just the latest, is that growth of, you know, it's kind of bigger than me now.
Yeah. It has its own momentum, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like the work comes from you.
Yeah.
And you're just a conduit for that, really, aren't you, in a way?
Yeah.
It just comes from you, and sometimes you know a possible direction, but then something comes along and steers you in another particular way you hadn't anticipated. Yeah.
And I think the role of the artist, should probably resonate with this, is just to remain open, I think, to that, whatever it is that's coming through. You know, the work wants to be manifest. We've just got to let it.
Yeah,
and
that's
maybe...
it. Not try and control it.
Exactly, and you know, maybe surrender the ego and allow for it to happen through us, for the good of everything, for the collective, if you like.
So in the exhibition, you've included some excerpts from essays that you've been writing that happen alongside the photographic work, sometimes sort of separately, sometimes quite connected to the making of the photographs. That's obviously been a really important part of the process, the creative process for you. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? So,
you know, writing's kind of evolved along with my creative practice in many ways, kind of organically. It was, you know, an intuitive thing to start sitting and reflecting about what all of this meant to me. It's funny that the journaling actually came first before photography.
Oh, right, okay.
Back, you know, I'm constantly in not turmoil, but in, you know, trying to decide whether it's an 8-year journey or a 7-year journey. Because for a year, I was journaling and doing some mobile phone documentation of my physical transformation. So the writing's kind of foundational. So it was never a question of, you know, is this going to be left out? But in the way that it's evolved into these reflective, creative essays, I couldn't have foreseen that. But there's often, you know, a little bit of kind of a question mark with photographs as to whether they need, well, for one, titles, and also, you know, writing alongside them. And I've seen a few photographers throughout my journey kind of questioning that, you know, should a photograph just stand on its own? And I think, you know, it's open for interpretation and open for argument, if you like. For me, you know, it's quite essential, actually, that I have these, you know, small kind of guiding quotations as well as the larger excerpts of essays, because I'm trying to communicate something wider than, you know, the beauty of nature. The beauty of nature is what it is. But then contextually, there's so much else that I'm trying to say that could not possibly be communicated without words, I don't believe. So they're just a kind of, for me, a guide for people, you know, like when they see something, you know, up on the walls about reprogramming mind, maybe then I'd hope that could just spark a little bit of thought, because for me, the thinking side of things is equally as important as the being and the meditative photographing.
Well, in some ways, perhaps those meditative moments allow for those ideas and thoughts to come through anyway, and in a way that they also mark a particular trajectory of how your work and ideas are evolving. And so, you know, they are also markers of time in a sense.
Right.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I'd never thought of it like that. Yeah, I suppose, you know, with where I'm at right now, with what I believe to be kind of the end of chapter 1, you know, with this exhibition, with the book, yeah, these are, I guess, kind of foundational essays that will stand alongside that body of work, you know, as part of the book, to mark a place in time for me and also for the photographs themselves.
Yeah.
And I suppose in a similar way to we talked about the photography evolving, maybe some of the essays and the thoughts around the essays will evolve as I continue to grow and interact with people. You know, already I had a conversation with my friend about one of the sentences in one of the pieces up there about this is what it means to become human.
Yes, okay.
And you know, I queried him and, you know, and asked, well, you know, you related to that. And then I kind of asked him the question, so what does that mean to you, to be human? So already there's this kind of interesting dialogue opening up around the words as well, that will give me different perspectives. And
so really what you're talking about is an exchange, isn't it?
Right.
It's not a one-way position in which you're communicating a set of ideas and the door's closed.
Right.
That's your ideas, and there's no recourse for anybody to kind of come back. In fact, you're positively encouraging
absolutely.
that.
It's
and
very
how it
much, sorry?
how it'll influence your work
Yeah.
going forward.
Well, I mean, one of my philosophies to life is that there is no end. You know, yeah, it's the end of chapter 1 and whatnot, but you know, these aren't definitive. These are, as much as anything, conversation starters. And you know, my philosophy is kind of brick by brick, in the sense that I'm building myself as well as I'm building these bodies of work. So the more I can have these conversations, the more I can grow, the more another person hopefully can grow and take something and learn and, you know, sometimes disagree. And, you know, it's all a process of learning with, you know, the pursuit of ultimately a truth beyond all of it.
Yeah. So we've talked about the fact that, you know, you've got this 7 or 8 year journey in terms of your photography kind of practice.
Yeah.
Obviously, you didn't come through a kind of art school, kind of conventional art school route, and you've taught yourself photography, and you kind of it's been a pathway very much self-led. Could you talk a little bit about that, because I think it's quite an interesting kind of background, really.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you know, this all began really on a whim, on a kind of, I guess, a feeling of impulse, of curiosity. You know, I was kind of documenting my my physique transformation journey through the lens of my mobile phone. So the first photo I ever took was that selfie with, you know, that was the intention of telling a story, a selfie of me smiling, although I wasn't smiling on the inside because I'd just been through heartbreak and, you know, breakdown of my first relationship, which kind of awoke, you know, a lot of this grief and pain and sadness inside of me. That ran much deeper than that. So, yeah, a very unconventional way to start a photographic journey. And then I proceeded then for 12 to 18 months to document, you know, me turning my pain into power under the bar, which I'd always kind of felt drawn to do, to turn my life, to turn myself into something, you know. I had these, let's say, immature father figures growing up who didn't really set the best examples to me. So I've always felt this call to become a man with a, you know, with something to show, you know, never to allow my past to kind of control me. So, you know, I went through that process of documenting my physique changes, which all the time was a psychological transformation as well, really. And it was only 18 months into, or 12 months in, that I walked past my sister's bedroom one day and she had a DSLR camera sat on her dressing room table. And I was heading out for a walk to Plas Glyn y Weddw in mid Wales. And I sent her a text and said, hey, do you mind if I take your camera? You know, and I still remember the moment kind of seeing it on the dressing room table and, you know, picking it up for the first time and not knowing what to do with it, you know, not knowing how to take a picture apart from pressing the button. Didn't know how to focus the lens for a long time. Didn't know what MF, AF meant. So I took it out and yeah, I just photographed everything, you know, my friend, tuna sandwiches, plants in the cafe, the waterfall, and fell in love with photography from the first moment. There was something quite, for me, special, quite sacred about kind of coming back, you know, here, kind of to this place of, I guess, place of safety. You know, had a big fear of being seen growing up. That was difficult for me, you know. I remember a lady in a supermarket when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. I was with my mum. And she would draw attention to my eyes and say, oh, he's got beautiful blue eyes, hasn't he? And I would remember kind of like shying away and being like, you know, very wanting to kind of hide in this place of, you know, safety within my own world. And for me, that kind of coming home to the camera was that place of safety. And it's certainly felt like that for the past, you know, 5, 6, 7 years, where I go out on these excursions and it's an opportunity to retreat, you know, away from the world and to come back.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about this sort of facade, something, you know, you were the physical kind of facade, sort of hiding the internal person in a sense, or portraying something so somebody wouldn't question that internal person, and then using the camera as a way of revealing that person, but not revealing the whole.
Right.
And then, but it's really quite a brave move that when you took that camera and you took it out into the landscape, not knowing what to do with it or, you know, how to use it. That's quite a gutsy thing to do, I think, in a way. And then, you know, you said it felt like a place of home. You are kind of hiding behind it, like you say, but actually it's really interesting because I think your work and the way you approach your work, maybe this is because of the journey you've undertaken. I think of you as being quite an open person, a person who's really wants to give, a person who isn't afraid of asking other people their feelings and their thoughts on something, and so it's kind of like you've turned your inside outside. I know sometimes you probably feel like you want to retreat and move away from that, but in a way you've almost taken your inside and brought it on the outside. It's like a sort of a transformation in that way.
It's felt, especially at times, like a complete kind of 180-degree turn of like being very, you know, withdrawn and very hidden and, you know, getting incredibly embarrassed in social situations and probably in some ways having some kind of social anxieties at times to, you know, all of a sudden, like everything's on show. And I mean, that can be quite scary sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
But then it's a journey that I felt like I've had to take because I don't want to live my life being so hidden and being so withdrawn and keeping so much in when there's so much in there to give.
Yeah. Well,
you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's really apparent how you embrace life in that way.
Yeah.
You know, that's really comes through, and I think it comes through in your work and in your writing. You know, you've grabbed things with both hands, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have moments where I connect with people, you know, through my exhibitions. And in London, when, you know, Limelight was on display, a lady came in and she started crying straight away, like within seconds of seeing the work and seeing me. So, you know, moments like those and, you know, receiving words today and, you know, people's comments today, they just make it all completely worthwhile in the sense that, like, I understand people. You know, a lot of my work's born through deep empathy for the world, you know, growing up in situations where, you know, people were so out of control and, you know, there was a lot of abuse and violence. It kind of just birthed in me this deep sensitivity towards people that, you know, my stepfathers, they were abusive for a reason. You know, they wanted some understanding, some help, you know, although communicating it in very strange ways, but that's what humans do, isn't it? So why not?
Fear and whatnot.
And things come out in such backward ways when they often don't have to. You know, if we just find the courage to open and be vulnerable, really, you know, then what might the world be? I don't know.
Very wise, isn't it? Wise words, Brad.
Wow.
But it's that, you know, I think that emotional kind of maturity has been kind of, forced upon you in a sense,
Yeah.
hasn't it? You've not backed away from it. You've seized it and you've tackled it, and
Yeah.
you're dealing with that, but also you're really wanting to share that experience with other people.
Yeah, I want other people to kind of understand themselves.
Yeah. So, within all your work, obviously nature is the key element in the process of making the work, and it's so important to you. And
Yeah.
I think it seems it's important that it's a way of connecting with people, actually. Sort of, connecting with yourself and then connecting with others in other ways. Do you want to talk a little bit about how nature has impacted the making of your work?
So there's a line in one of my essays, I can't remember exactly which one it is, but it's like the trees have been my father, best friend and therapist over the past few years. So, it's about space, space in these locations to open. And nature for me is that space. It's a place of non-judgment that enables me to be me, beyond society, beyond buildings, beyond electronics, beyond, world of ego, of judgment. Beyond that, there is this world of nature. I know I probably shouldn't get too dualistic now in that they're separate, because they're not, they're one. But I feel like these spaces are imperative for the human being to go and to, allow themselves to unfold and to open. And for me, it's been a case of kind of meeting parts of myself out in nature as well. Meeting parts of myself that maybe were hidden and repressed, but being out here has just given me that neutral space to unfold and unfurl. Spring is springing outside, and I was looking at the ferns with my partner the other day, and how the little ferns kind of unfurl. She called them fetuses. They look like fetuses in the womb, just kind of like opening. And for me, that's exactly what this whole thing is about. We go into nature to unfurl and to express and to just open to the world.
Sort of being meditative in that space, but then maybe being a mirror to that space as well.
Right.
In a way.
Right, yeah, nature is the mirror to our truest self, beyond ideas of what we're told we are, what we think we are, based upon projections and opinions. There is a true version of us that I feel like can only really be seen and felt in the natural world. When I'm out with clients on workshops, and I get to really kind of open these wonderful avenues of conversation. I believe they wouldn't open up in the same way if we weren't out here, without stimulation and without, ideas. A lot of our kind of ideas of what the world is are kind of in here, and that's impacted in society, within this, societal environment. But out here, we don't have any of that. There's not much noise, and there's just a stillness, an inner stillness and an emergence of the person, which I feel like everybody in the world could benefit from, an understanding of what nature can do as a spirit.
Yeah. Brad, you talked about this piece, First Dance, as being a pivotal work in the exhibition, and one of your earlier works. Can you talk a bit about when you made it and about this piece and why it's so important to you?
Yeah, so First Dance was created back in 2021, and it's kind of foundational of all of this, actually. Looking around the room, this is the first, the earliest work in the exhibition. Okay. And I mean, before this, I was kind of maybe creating more representational photographs of places and of times. This, I believe, was birthed after a conversation with my grandma one Boxing Day 2020. We were at my mum's and my grandma was around, and I was showing her some works on the computer from a trip to Scotland and the Lake District just probably 3 months before. And, I had a picture of the Old Man of Storr. I don't know if you've seen Storr, huge rock pinnacle. And I was kind of talking a lot about the technique and the place, and I was kind of like, wow, look at the size of this. I'd kind of had history and well, a little interest in geology through my time studying geography. So I was really kind of fascinated by the structure. And she stopped me and she said, "Don't you see the faces in the rocks?" And I kind of looked at my nan like she'd been, smoking something a little bit funny over Christmas or Boxing Day dinner. But I'd zoomed in and lo and behold, there was a face in one of the pinnacles. And then as I'd zoomed in, she drew my attention to another rock and another face. And she said, "It's a man and a woman. It's a couple." And I kind of started nodding, I'd been convinced, I can see these faces now, maybe you're not going crazy after all. And then, I'd kind of reflected upon this conversation after the Boxing Day meal and after my nan had gone home, and really kind of thought, like, my way of doing this photography is quite boring, isn't it? My nan's really engaged in her imagination, with a sense of wonder and awe, and really kind of resorted in some ways to the child's mind again. We'd lost my granddad probably a couple of years, I think, before. So she had a lot of time, and she'd started to use her imagination a lot more and start telling some stories of her own childhood in that time before we'd had that conversation. So I thought, like, we start our lives as, innocent, awe-inspired, wondrous children, curious about everything. And we obviously reached that point again. And I was like, what the hell is happening in this period in between? I was obsessed with, figures, money and business, and I was employed in electrical wholesalers. So it was very, numbers-driven, kind of cutthroat business at times, which had kind of impacted me, I think, reflecting. I didn't know it at the time how much it had, but, I'd lost connection with my own child and, had stopped using my imagination. I used to read a lot of stories when I was young, but, certain events in my life kind of pulled me away from that version of myself. Many reasons, but kind of connecting with nature, coming back behind the camera has kind of reconnected me with that child again. And 2 months probably after that conversation, maybe even 1 month, may have been end of January, beginning of February, I'd created First Dance. And you can see, two trees dancing, kind of waltzing through the mist. Maybe representational of my nan and granddad. I don't know. They, to my memory,
holding hands,
holding
aren't
hands,
they? Almost, yeah.
And that relationship between my nan and granddad was to my child's mind, I'm sure they had their own issues, but to me as a kid, growing up with relationships that weren't so, let's say, romantic. I had this romantic view of my nan and granddad's relationship, being a child and going to visit them once per year at their house, and maybe this stands to represent them. And also, stands to kind of as a foundation for all of this work. Limelight, just behind me, was created a month after that as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's almost like the way you talk about your nan looking at that piece of work. It's like she was looking for a way to connect with that image, to connect with the place, connect with you, because you'd been the one who'd taken the picture. And it feels like, maybe there is that search for connection through when we're in the landscape or when we look at work or photos. Or...
I think it's ingrained in us, isn't it, to want to connect. And I think a lot of our issues are from not knowing how to disconnect. And the soul in all of us wants to be recognized, doesn't it? It wants to be seen. It wants to, be mirrored by somebody, but, doesn't always come across as so easy to do that, does it?
It's a conversation, isn't it? It's a conversation between you and that space, that environment, and seeing something. It's kind of a brain kind of conversation. Yeah. And then through visual medium.
Yeah, I'd never thought of, that in the sense of my nan wanting connection through, through a different medium. And I suppose in many ways that is the beauty of putting things like this on, isn't it? It's the invitation for people to connect.
Yeah, definitely. So this exhibition is called Finding Light, and it's clearly apparent that light is such an important element in the whole of the show. But obviously in this title, this work, Limelight, has lots of kind of associations and I know it's a really key piece for you, and we've touched upon that already, but do you want to have a little bit of a discussion about that in more detail?
Yeah, so of course, light, being a photographer, that is the key to a great photograph, right? But I think on a deeper level, finding light, and this photograph in particular, kind of represents the search for light, the search for purpose. You know, for me, I find my purpose, or I'm finding my purpose, an ever-growing quest, of course, through creativity, through nature. And, you know, Limelight here was created just a couple of months again after First Dance, when I'd started to apply more kind of imagination to my works. And further to that, it was created just probably 3 or 4 months after I'd handed my resignation in and from the business that I was part of, and decided that I was going to pursue the artist's path full time. So, you know, in this photograph, this was as much a stage as anything, with the light of the sun beaming in from up here and creating this beautiful glow, you know, in the field here, which the tree also representational of me. In my mind. You know, I'm on my own stage of life with my audience. You know, I'd built a little following online, and I'd had, you know, people kind of messaging me and, yes, really supporting what I was doing in those earliest days. So in many ways, this was a self-portrait as much as a portrait of a tree. So,
because it's got a feeling of sort of vulnerability to it, and obviously very much that kind of chiaroscuro light, traditional in lots of painting, you know, that direct light and casting those deep shadows, and very theatrical. It is a stage, you know, it's all those things, but it is definitely the sense of, you know, vulnerability. I mean, the trees in the background, you know, appear to be frosted and cold, and, you know, the light is kind of odd with that, and there's a sort of an ethereal quality to that as well. So I think it's a really powerful piece.
You mentioned vulnerability in that, and just kind of going back to what we were talking about before, you know, about kind of opening up the soul as an artist and revealing, you know, innermost corners of the self. You know, that kind of, as you talked then about the vulnerability of this and perhaps the fragility, kind of brought me back to kind of parts of myself that, you know, when points through my life, you know, I've felt real embarrassment, and it's kind of felt like this, like, you know, like, oh, here I am and everybody can see me right now. And that kind of feels like it could be a little bit kind of...
There's no hiding, is there?
There's no hiding,
No.
It's in there. And maybe there is, you know, I kind of liken it to, it's perhaps about to kind of do some kind of performance, maybe a dance or a song, but it's that moment of like, I'm open right now and the audience is behind, okay, what am I going to do with this moment?
I mean, also, I think the nature of the tree is kind of, is at the end of its life, isn't it? And it's transforming. The bark is being stripped away, and it's kind of, you know, it's had its days. But actually, for you, maybe it's a kind of rebirth, a moment in time where one chapter has ended in your life, and then you're embarking on something.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you in that sense. That, you know, there is no end and beginning in many ways. It's kind of a constant process, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
We've talked quite a bit about how you give back to an audience, and we've talked about the idea of an exhibition involving different people coming in to see the work, but also there's opportunity for active engagement, isn't there? And it's important for us as a gallery to do that, and kind of work with different groups of people. Would you want to share with us what you've got coming up and the kind of processes that you're keen to do?
Yeah, so alongside this show, we have the workshop with GISDA, with the young people, which I think is going to be pretty impactful. Well, not just for me, but for people as well. You know, it's kind of I'm in this process of, you know, I've understood what creativity and what nature can do for me, and now obviously through the exhibition, but also through these workshops and, you know, engagement processes, what, you know, it's a kind of case of now kind of packaging them all up and kind of giving them to other people to say, here's what I think creativity can do for you. So of course we're going to take to the woodland here at Plas, which is going to be, on the doorstep. And yeah, I think it's going to be pretty, incredible to be able to give this knowledge back to other people. And, that for me it's why I've done everything that I'm doing, really. It's why I write and it's why I create. It's all a case of education and re-education,
Yeah, and it's a kind of like an empowerment, isn't it? You're empowering people to, and giving them the opportunity to use creativity as a way of empowerment without it feeling forced or people thinking that they can't do it because they're not creative. But actually you're finding through photography, which is obviously so accessible to people because of the phone, it just gives them the way in that actually they might not have considered working. And I think it's really important, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's like you say, empowerment I think is the key, and that's how I work with all of my tuition and workshops. It's not about, people coming and doing things my way. I'm not going to say, you can't create like that, you're going to learn from me and do this my way. I'm not that kind of person. It's very much a respect that everybody has their own ways. You have your own thought process, I have my own. All of these people are going to have their own ways of thinking, their own ways of seeing, their own ways of creating. So for me it's about, okay, well, how can we recognize that in each individual person and give them a sense of, oh yeah, do you know what, I have got something unique here with how I see and how I think and how I feel. Everybody is completely unique, and this journey for me has been about me finding my own sense of power after those experiences through my youth that maybe stripped me of power in with domestic violence and abuse. It can leave people feeling very disempowered, and it's been about reclaiming that for me.
Taking control of
taking
that,
control,
of you,
exactly right, of my own inner world and my own decisions. We can all make decisions every day. And like I am a result today of decisions that I made 7-8 years ago, to pick the camera up and say, I'm not going to allow these situations to leave me down and beaten, but what can I turn those into? Let's turn this pain into power. So I really hope that with some of these people, particularly in the young people workshop, I really hope that it can be a sense of shining some light into their own strengths and power as well, so that they can then move forward in life and say, okay, I've got these skills now, and what can I do with them?
Because you're working with them over a period of time, aren't you? It's not just a one-off workshop. You're working with them over a period of weeks, aren't you?
Yeah, 6 weeks.
6 weeks you're working with them.
And we talked about the unfurling process before. It takes people a little bit of time sometimes to unfurl. So I feel like over the 6-week period, we could really go to some interesting places and leave some marks on people.
So it'll give time for reflection, won't it, for them in between those actual workshop sessions? And it'll be really interesting to hear how they see the journey, how they feel that journey. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Getting excited.
Yeah, it will be
thinking
really
about
exciting.
it. Yeah, it's bringing me back to the 10-week project I did in a primary school, and seeing the children's confidence grow with their own, written abilities and with their own interactions with nature. It is, a beautiful process to watch people flourish.
And I think you're sharing your work with us more widely, aren't you? Doing a presentation as well, a slide presentation, aren't you, on the 31st of May?
31st, yeah.
So is that something you've done quite a bit, is it?
Yeah. I've been presenting pretty intensely now for the past 18 months, mostly through camera clubs.
Yes.
Some community groups, some schools, but primarily camera clubs, which is, again, a completely different audience to what I'll be welcoming here at Plas, which, leaves me with a feeling of excitement to see where conversations might go, with some kind of different angles on questions, not such, photography specific.
Very technical
A
questions.
lot of times very technical and very, where and, and what, but maybe there'll be some more kind of philosophical why questions from audiences during that talk. So that's going to be
Especially because
exciting.
a lot of the work that you have produced here is based in North Wales. The photography is all North Wales, and obviously we are in North Wales
Yes.
in a very particular part and
Yes.
on Penllyn. But there'll be people that'll be bringing some of that knowledge, history, connectedness to the land with them, won't they?
Yeah, and what I particularly love about speaking to people in North Wales is that there's a lot of kind of deeply rooted in the landscape types of people. There's kind of Celtic, Druid kind of origins around this area. So the connection, it tends to be very strong with certain people in the north. Hence why I feel called to probably live here one day. But to have those kinds during a talk, it's going to be an interesting one, I think.
Yeah. So what do you hope that, Brad, that people will take away with them after they've visited your exhibition and read the essays that you've got on display? What are you hoping that people will take away in their hearts and minds?
That we're not all so dissimilar after all, I think, internally. Skin colour, race, religion, all aside, this is, as the quote says, what binds and unites us all. And you talked a little bit before about the kind of feeling of connection and, people wanting to connect with something through the medium of art that, allows, hopefully, people into my own heart, and then also on a mirror kind of level into themselves as well. And I think that what I'm wanting to do through my work, through my writings, is to weave this kind of idea of, connectedness and similarity and unity, so people feel understood and feel seen and heard, and can connect. A lot of my childhood years and memories from my youth were kind of division of parents kind of being at each other's throats, and maybe a sense of war in the home. And you only have to turn on the news now and you see news of wars breaking out. And for me, that is a kind of manifestation of internal disconnect and internal unrest. And I think through interactions with nature and unity with the spirit, with the Great Mother, then we can kind of reconnect with our own self and unite internally, which is then what is going to hopefully kind of manifest in the external world. So I think the fact that nature brings us all together, and it is what we've got in common, is that we are all from Earth. And that can often be forgotten when maybe we spend a lot of time living up in the mind.
That's true.
Actually, let's come back to Earth.
Grounding people and opening hearts, not just minds. Yeah.
Exactly, and bridging those hearts and minds.
Well, I certainly think that will happen in this show, Brad. People have already expressed utter joy at seeing your work, and I think that will continue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.